There is this really specific, honestly kind of haunting image that has completely occupied my mind ever since we started digging into the source material for today's deep dive.
Oh, yeah. What is it?
Well, I want you, the listener, to just imagine a man, a guy who has quite literally done absolutely everything that society, his parents, his entire culture told him to do.
Right, the guy who played by all the rules.
Exactly. He kept his head down, he went to school, got the respectable job, took on the crushing 30-year mortgage just to secure a home in a safe neighborhood for his family.
He fixes the roof on the weekends, works overtime to shield his kids from the economy.
Yes, all of it.
Yeah.
By every traditional metric, he is the load-bearing pillar of his household. But then, one random Tuesday morning, he wakes up to find that the entire structure, his marriage, his home, his access to his own children, the legal system itself, it is all just collapsed directly on top of him.
Yeah, that is a brutal reality for a lot of guys.
It really is. He finds himself sitting in this sterile family courtroom, entirely bewildered, just watching everything he spent decades building get surgically carved up and handed away.
And the worst part is how he's treated during that process.
Right. Throughout this entire agonizing process, he is treated by the judge, the lawyers, society at large, as the villain of his own life story.
Which is just, it's wild when you think about it.
It is. So if you are listening to this right now, and you are a man who has felt that profound, deeply disorienting shock, that visceral realization that the institutions you inherently trusted have fundamentally turned against you, then this specific deep dive is speaking directly, intimately to you.
It really is the moment the matrix breaks for a lot of men.
Yeah.
It's that sudden, jarring, and, well, often financially catastrophic realization that the rules you were handed growing up were never actually a blueprint for your success. They were, a script for your compliance.
Oh, a script for compliance. Wow.
And when that script inevitably fails to produce the utopian, happily ever after results you were promised, the overarching system doesn't examine or blame the script. It immediately, ruthlessly blames you.
Exactly. And that is precisely why today we're embarking on this massive, ultra-long, incredibly incisive review of a highly provocative 2026 ebook.
I am really looking forward to getting into this one.
Me too. It is called The Folly of Happiness: Why Rational Men Choose Growing Up and Waking Up by Conrad Riker. We're going to take this text and just completely deconstruct it piece by piece.
It is a dense read for sure.
And very dense.
Yeah.
Now, because we're going to be diving into some seriously deep paradigm-shifting waters here, I need to urge you, the listener, to like and subscribe to the show right now so you never miss these extensive reviews.
Yeah, hit subscribe.
And I strongly, highly encourage you to read the source material for yourself. You can buy the ebook right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books. Also, make sure you go follow the author, Conrad Riker, over on Substack at the handle at Conrad Raden Riker.
Highly recommend checking out his Substack.
Yeah, his work is dense, it is intensely challenging, and it is something you really need to engage with directly to grasp the full scope of his arguments.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of Riker's text, we really must establish an ironclad disclaimer here.
Yes, very important.
This book is intense. It contains highly charged, deeply controversial, and unapologetically political material.
To put it mildly.
Right. Riker is launching a direct, sustained intellectual assault on modern feminism, modern leftism, and the entire bureaucratic apparatus of the family court system.
Yes, and we need to be crystal clear on this with you guys.
Yeah.
As your hosts, we are not here to take political sides.
Absolutely not.
We are not endorsing, nor are we denouncing the author's specific political viewpoints. Our job, our sole mission today, is to act as your impartial guides through this material.
We're just unpacking it.
Exactly. We are here to unpack the historical arguments, the psychological frameworks, and the philosophical architecture presented in this text. We want you to fully, deeply understand Riker's red-pilled perspective on exactly how Western institutions were fundamentally altered over the last centuries.
So you can evaluate the architecture of his argument entirely for yourself.
Precisely. We are just the cartographers mapping out the very rugged territory he has laid out.
And the core mission of this deep dive is to rigorously deconstruct Riker's foundational unifying argument.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
It is. He claims that the modern, highly feminized concept of happiness was not just some natural cultural shift, but was deliberately weaponized to dismantle traditional patriarchal structure.
Deliberately weaponized.
Right. Furthermore, he argues that the only way for rational men to survive this institutional capture and reclaim their personal agency is to completely, unapologetically abandon the pursuit of happiness altogether.
Just drop it completely.
Drop it entirely and adopt what he rigorously defines as the contentment standard.
Right. And what makes Riker's approach so gripping is that he doesn't start from some, ivory tower of abstract sociological theory.
No, he's very grounded in his own experience.
He starts in the trenches of his own brutal initiation. He opens the book by describing his own experience being run through the absolute meat grinder of the family court system.
It's a harrowing opening chapter.
It really is. He did the grueling emotional labor. He attended the endless couples therapy sessions. He utilized all the prescribed active listening techniques.
Everything you're supposedly meant to do.
Everything.
Yeah.
And he still watched his life get completely dismantled by a legal apparatus that he claims is mechanically designed to enforce female supremacy and extract male wealth.
Which he refers to as an involuntary, brutal rite of passage.
But instead of retreating into bitterness or playing the victim, he says he picked up what he calls the dialectic sword to cut away the societal illusions.
And his first target with that sword is brilliant.
I found it fascinating. His very first analytical target, the precise place where he says this entire societal trap begins, isn't a law or a political movement.
No, it's the dictionary.
Exactly. It's the actual dictionary. It's the etymology of the words we use every single day without thinking.
This is where Riker's argument really establishes its anchor. And it's a brilliant place to start because language dictates how we perceive reality.
Oh, 100%.
He argues that the modern marital crisis is, at its absolute root, a linguistic bait and switch. He takes us all the way back to the etymology of the word happiness itself.
Okay, let's get into this.
If you trace the word back to its Old Norse root, the word is hap.
Hap, which is where we get words like happenstance or perhaps.
Yes.
It literally means sheer chance, luck, or a favorable accident.
A favorable accident.
Yeah. Riker points out that by its very linguistic DNA, the concept of happiness denotes a random fluctuation. It is a temporary alignment of external variables.
It's like the weather is nice, you found a $20 bill, you had a really good meal.
Right, things that are entirely, fundamentally outside of an individual's long-term control.
It is the roll of the dice. Now, Riker contrasts that directly with the word contentment. Contentment comes from the Latin contentus, which is the past participle of contenere.
And what does that translate to?
It means to be contained, to be structurally solid, to be held firmly within limits.
Wow, so structurally solid versus a random roll of the dice.
Exactly. Riker's central thesis here is that modern society has taken this fleeting, wildly uncontrollable variable, happiness, and hoisted it squarely onto the shoulders of men as the supreme, unyielding metric of their worth as husbands, as fathers, and as human beings.
It's an incredible framing, and as I was reading this part, a very specific image came to mind for me.
Let's hear it.
It's like you are an engineer who has been hired to build a massive, multi-million-dollar load-bearing bridge.
Okay, high stakes.
Right. You are the chief architect. You are responsible for the lives of everyone driving over it. But when you look at the mandated blueprints, the city council has dictated that your primary building material has to be a coin toss.
That is absurd.
It is. You are legally required to guarantee structural life or death integrity using a material that is, by definition, random, fleeting, and immaterial.
That analogy perfectly captures the absurdity Riker is pointing out, and he takes it a step further into the realm of philosophy by introducing what he calls the natural law of agency.
The natural law of agency, okay.
Yeah. He argues that demanding a man manufacture and sustain a woman's perpetual happiness actively violates this fundamental natural law.
How so?
Because a rational agent, a man, has absolute sovereign control over his own actions. He controls his duty, his provision, his physical labor, and his moral choices.
Right, the things he actually does.
But he has zero absolute agency over the internal neurochemistry and subjective emotional state of another autonomous adult.
Right, you simply cannot reach into someone else's brain and manually adjust their serotonin levels.
Exactly. Which means if a man is being judged entirely by a metric he biologically and physically cannot control, he isn't just failing.
He is structurally, mathematically guaranteed to fail from the very start.
Yes. The game is rigged at the level of human biology.
That is so heavy. But Riker doesn't just leave this as a philosophical musing, right?
No, he aggressively backs it up with the physics of emotion, leaning heavily into the biological mechanism of hedonic adaptation.
Hedonic adaptation.
Right. He cites a landmark, incredibly famous 1978 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology by Philip Brickman and his colleagues. It's a fascinating piece of research.
But I love this part of the book. Walk us through the Brickman study.
So Brickman studied two extreme, diametrically opposed groups of people. Individuals who had recently won massive, life-changing state lotteries, and individuals who had recently suffered catastrophic, permanently disabling accidents resulting in paraplegia or quadriplegia.
Okay, so the absolute best thing that could happen to you versus the absolute worst thing.
Exactly. And if you follow common sense, you'd expect the lottery winners to be on cloud nine for the rest of their lives, their problems permanently solved.
Naturally.
And you'd expect the accident victims to be permanently, hopelessly devastated, incapable of ever finding joy again.
But that is emphatically not what the data showed.
No, it wasn't, which is why the study sent shockwaves through the psychological community. The research revealed that while the lottery winners obviously experienced a massive initial spike in subjective joy, and the accident victims experienced a devastating drop.
Within a surprisingly short amount of time, right?
Yes, often just a matter of months. Both groups returned almost exactly to their previous baseline emotional state.
That is insane to think about. Their neurochemistry just reset.
The lottery winners got used to the mansions and the money, and it became their new mundane normal.
And the accident victims adapted to their physical limitations and found their baseline level of day-to-day satisfaction again.
Hedonic adaptation.
The treadmill.
The treadmill. So what Riker does here is apply a ruthless, almost mathematical syllogism to modern marriage.
Right, he connects the dots.
He argues, look, if a literal $1 million windfall, a complete removal of all financial stress, cannot permanently alter a human being's baseline happiness, then the modern feminists demand that a husband must permanently alter his wife's baseline happiness by, doing the dishes.
Or engaging in chore play.
Chore play, exactly. Or sitting through hours of active listening. Riker says demanding that is a scientifically illiterate hoax.
It is quite literally a biological impossibility.
Because the dopamine spike from the man vacuuming the living room will inevitably fade, just like the millions of dollars faded.
The goalposts will inevitably move.
And they move not because the man failed or didn't do enough, but because human biology strictly requires the neurochemical reset.
Exactly. Riker is essentially saying that the entire modern marital advice industry is built on a denial of basic human biology.
Which is a massive indictment of the industry. It is. But this leads to a critical juncture in his argument.
Right, because this raises a massive glaring question. If biology guarantees that these dopamine spikes will fade, and that the emotional goalposts are going to constantly, predictably shift,
why does modern society universally treat female dissatisfaction as a male failing?
yes, if it's an inescapable biological reality, why is the husband always the one apologizing in the therapist's office?
Riker's answer to that is chilling. He argues that it is a deliberate apparatus of control.
A mechanism of control.
Yeah. He delves into evolutionary psychology here, arguing that female-coded emotional demands act as a subconscious biological fitness test.
Okay, unpack that for us.
In our ancestral environment, a woman's innate hypergamy, her drive to secure the most capable mate, would constantly test a man to ensure he had the physical and psychological competence to protect her from real, tangible threats.
Right, like saber-toothed tigers, invading tribes, starvation.
But in the modern, hyper-safe, climate-controlled Western world, there are no saber-toothed tigers.
There are no invading tribes at the gates of the suburb.
Precisely. So according to Riker, because the physical threats are gone, her subconscious evolutionary software weaponizes her own unhappiness to test his boundaries.
Wow, it's the only stress test she has left.
Yes. She creates a chaotic emotional storm out of nothing, a manufactured grievance, just to see how he reacts.
So if he caves, if he abandons his own grasp on reality and apologizes for an irrational feeling just to keep the peace,
he fails the evolutionary test. He proves he is weak, and she subconsciously loses respect for him.
but if he stands firm, maintains his emotional regulation, and grounds the household in objective reality, he passes.
Exactly. But here is the insidious part that Riker points out. Society has completely rigged the game.
Because society, the media, the legal system, They all tell the man that if she is unhappy, he is fundamentally defective.
They instruct him to fail the test.
They literally train him to fail.
Yes, society demands that he capitulate to the manufactured storm, which keeps the man perpetually off balance.
He's always apologizing.
Always reading self-help books, always trying to solve a problem that is biologically and mathematically unsolvable.
He is on a hamster wheel where the speed keeps increasing. And his wife's respect for him drops lower with every frantic step he takes to appease her.
It's a brutal cycle.
Okay, so if human biology makes constant happiness impossible, and capitulating to emotional chaos destroys a man's respect in his own home, how did this expectation become the absolute dominant law of the land?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do we get to a point where men are legally and socially required to provide something that cannot be provided?
Riker traces this meticulously, and this is where he shifts from biology to the capture of modern psychology.
Let's get into the psychology because this blew my mind.
This is one of the most fascinating historical progressions in the entire book. Riker traces the infiltration of the home back to the post-World War II era, specifically the 1940s and 50s.
With the rise of humanistic psychology, right?
Yes, and the highly influential work of Carl Rogers. Rogers was a pioneer who developed what is known clinically as client-centered therapy.
And the core mechanic of client-centered therapy, which I actually find really interesting in its original context, is unconditional positive regard.
Right.
The idea is that the therapist doesn't judge, doesn't diagnose, and doesn't correct the patient. The therapist acts as a warm, totally accepting mirror, unconditionally validating whatever feelings the patient expresses.
In order to facilitate self-actualization and healing.
Right. But Riker is quick to provide the crucial historical context that is almost always omitted today.
Because this clinical framework was originally designed and utilized in asylum settings.
Asylums. It was for treating individuals with severe clinical depression, profound trauma, and serious debilitating mental health disorders.
It was a triage mechanism.
Exactly. It was for people whose egos were so shattered, they needed absolute, uncritical validation just to function at a baseline level.
But Riker claims this clinical asylum-based framework became a Trojan horse that was wheeled directly into the marital bedroom.
A therapeutic Trojan horse.
He argues that over the subsequent decades, fueled by the self-esteem movement and early feminism, this highly specific therapeutic model slithered out of the clinical psychiatric setting.
And it became the default, socially mandated syntax for how everyday husbands and wives are supposed to communicate.
Yes. It systematically taught men to treat their wives not as capable, rational adult partners engaged in the mutual struggle of life, but as fragile, deeply wounded patients who require constant, unconditional emotional validation from their husbands.
He frames this as a catastrophic shift from logos to pesos, and I want to make sure we really understand the mechanics of this shift.
Yeah.
Because Riker leans on these classical terms heavily.
It's central to his whole philosophy.
Right. So in classical Greek philosophy, logos represents reason, the logical structuring of reality, the word, objective truth. It is the solid ground.
And pathos.
Pathos, on the other hand, represents emotion, the subjective feeling, the internal fluctuating state of the individual.
Riker argues that traditional functional marriage for thousands of years was grounded firmly in the dialectical pursuit of logos.
The husband and wife face the incredibly harsh objective realities of the world. Disease, famine, economics.
And they ordered their lives around navigating that objective truth.
But the therapeutic Trojan horse, utilizing Rogers' unconditional positive regard, completely inverted that hierarchy.
It replaced the grounded reality of logos with the absolute tyranny of pathos.
Suddenly, the feminine subjective emotional narrative, like how she felt about the budget, how she felt about his tone of voice, began to completely supersede masculine objective reality.
Facts became subordinate to feelings.
And Riker is absolutely merciless when he applies this critique to the modern couples therapy industry.
Oh, he takes no prisoners.
He actually takes direct, sustained aim at the Gottman Institute. For those who might not know, the Gottman Institute is basically the untouchable gold standard in modern relationship counseling.
They have defined the metrics by which almost all modern couples therapists operate.
But Riker views their terminology and their clinical metrics not as tools for healing, but as linguistic weapons of what he explicitly calls gynocentric warfare.
He does, and his breakdown of the clinical term stonewalling is a perfect example of this.
Oh, this part was so good. Explain how they view stonewalling.
So, in the established clinical literature, stonewalling is defined as a behavior where a partner withdraws from a heated conversation, goes silent, avoids eye contact, and refuses to actively engage.
Right, and the Gottman Institute heavily pathologizes this. They label it one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse for a marriage.
A toxic behavior that destroys intimacy.
But Riker flips that entirely on its head. And honestly, his logic here is really compelling. He says, look at how this actually plays out in reality.
Put it in a real scenario.
Right. Imagine a situation where a woman is unleashing a completely disordered, irrational, highly escalated emotional tirade. She is throwing out past grievances, attacking his character, completely dysregulated.
Okay, so a massive storm.
Right. The man, utilizing his innate logic, instantly realizes that actively engaging with this hysteria, trying to argue facts against a hurricane of emotion, will only pour gasoline on the fire.
It will escalate the situation into a catastrophic fight.
Exactly. So, to protect the peace of the home, to keep the metaphorical house from burning down, he consciously retreats into stoic silence. He maintains his emotional regulation by disengaging.
From Riker's perspective, that man is exercising profound discipline and emotional control. He is acting as a grounding rod for her chaotic lightning.
But instead of being praised for his self-control and his refusal to escalate, the couple goes to therapy, and the therapist slaps the man with a clinical diagnosis.
He is accused of stonewalling.
He is told his stoicism is a form of emotional abuse, while her chaotic, dysregulated emotional storm is validated by the therapist as a healthy, necessary need for connection.
The man's rational boundary is pathologized, and the woman's emotional chaos is institutionalized.
It's an epistemological trap. You literally cannot win.
And Riker brings in the renowned philosopher of science, Karl Popper, to explain exactly why this trap is so inescapable.
Karl Popper, yes.
Popper is famous for his theory of falsifiability. He argued that for any claim, any theory, to be considered scientifically valid or rationally debatable, it must be intrinsically falsifiable.
There must be some observable, metric, or logical way to prove it wrong.
Exactly. If I say all swans are white, you can falsify that by showing me a black swan.
But Riker points out that female-coded communication, specifically the I feel statements that are absolutely mandated by modern therapy, relies entirely on strictly unfalsifiable claims.
Exactly. If a wife looks at her husband and says, I feel incredibly unsupported in this marriage,
Yeah.
you cannot logically disprove that feeling.
No, you can't. You can literally pull out the spreadsheets and show her the bank statements proving you pay 100% of the bills.
You can show her the calendar proving you did the school run every day this week.
You can list the physical chores you completed. But none of that matters because you cannot disprove her internal subjective emotion.
It's a phantom.
As a man, you are placed on trial for a crime with absolutely zero possibility of logical exoneration because the evidence is entirely invisible and subject to change without notice.
And this impossible standard, Riker argues, is the direct mechanism that creates the tragedy of the modern nice guy.
I really want to dig into this because Riker uses a very striking, very heavy historical analogy here.
The Munich Agreement.
Yes. He compares a man trying to negotiate with these modern, unfalsifiable emotional demands to the 1938 Munich Agreement.
Which was the infamous moment when British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain tried to appease Adolf Hitler by conceding the Sudetenland to Nazi Germany.
Hoping that by giving the tyrant what he wanted, it would buy peace in our time.
We all know how that worked out. It just emboldened the aggression.
Riker is essentially comparing modern marital negotiation to appeasing a tyrant. But wait, I have to challenge this framing for a second.
Okay, play devil's advocate.
If a guy is compromising, if he's utilizing active listening, if he's putting his wife's feelings first to maintain harmony, isn't he just being a good partner? Doesn't Riker's critique entirely redefine what society almost universally praises as the nice guy?
It absolutely redefines it, and that is exactly his intent. Riker argues that the nice guy syndrome is not a harmless psychological quirk, and it is certainly not a virtue.
He defines it as a failure, right?
A profound, catastrophic failure of masculine virtue. His logic is this. When a man attempts to appease the chaotic emotional void of a dysregulated partner by abandoning his adherence to logos,
Like by apologizing when he has done nothing objectively wrong.
or by agreeing to an irrational premise just to stop the yelling, he commits treason against his own soul and his own intellect.
He is trying to buy peace through appeasement, just like Chamberlain.
Exactly, but you cannot satiate a void. Riker argues that by prioritizing our temporary emotional comfort over objective, unbending reality, the nice guy guarantees her hypergamic contempt.
Because, going back to the evolutionary biology we discussed earlier, she is subconsciously testing his strength.
When he folds, he proves he is weak.
He proves that his boundaries are made of paper. If she can control his reality and make him apologize for something he didn't do just by pouting or manufacturing a grievance, how can she possibly trust him to stand up to a real threat?
Biologically, she cannot respect a man. She can manipulate that easily.
Precisely. She loses all respect for his competence.
She views him with contempt, and ultimately, by trying to be the nice guy, he engineers his own ruin.
He buys a front row ticket to his own castration, as Riker rather bluntly puts it in the text.
That is the exact quote, yes.
Wow. Okay, so we've established that the psychological and linguistic foundation of the home has been completely replaced by what Riker calls this gynocentric syntax.
But a marriage isn't just a psychological arrangement.
Right, it's a physical, structural, and legal entity. What happens to the actual architecture of the family when the foundation shifts from objective truth to subjective feeling?
This brings us to a massive paradigm shift in the book, where Riker takes a literal sledgehammer to the modern cultural sacred cow, the 50-50 egalitarian marriage.
Riker asserts unequivocally that the egalitarian marriage, the idea of a perfect 50-50 division of power, authority, and emotional labor, is not just difficult, it is a mathematical and physical impossibility.
It defies the laws of nature.
To prove this, he looks back at historical models of functional marriages, specifically pointing to the 18th and 19th century American pioneers.
When those men and women went out west in covered wagons to build homesteads, to manually dig wells out of the hard earth, to survive brutal winters and fight off literal predators and starvation, their marriage was not a romantic vacation.
Right, they weren't sitting around a campfire negotiating who felt more self-actualized that day, or splitting the chores 50-50 so nobody felt resentful.
Exactly. It was an ironclad covenant for mutual survival in an inherently hostile world. And survival requires a rigid functional hierarchy.
Riker uses an architectural metaphor here that I found really powerful and incredibly clarifying. He talks about the construction of the massive Gothic cathedrals in Europe, like Notre Dame de Paris.
The flying buttresses.
Yes. Now, the architectural genius of a Gothic cathedral is the use of flying buttresses and massive, singular load-bearing pillars. The grand, vaulted stone ceilings are incredibly heavy, creating immense, crushing downward pressure.
Physics dictates that pressure has to go somewhere or the entire building simply collapses on itself.
Right. So the architects designed the structure to channel all of that immense external pressure from the roof down through the flying buttresses and directly into singular, massive, masculine load-bearing pillars, which ground all that crushing weight deep into the earth.
And because the pillars bear the agonizing weight, the walls themselves can be delicate.
They can be thin, they can hold beautiful, fragile stained glass windows.
It is a stunning metaphor, and Riker maps it directly onto the structure of the family unit. He argues that the patriarchal structure of the family operates on the exact same unyielding physical laws as the cathedral.
The immense pressure of the external world, the crushing economic burdens, the physical threats, the relentless demands of securing resources and defending the perimeter.
It all must be systematically channeled through a singular, undivided male head of household. He is the load-bearing pillar.
He takes the weight so the family can experience beauty and safety behind the walls.
Yes. If you remove that singular pillar, or if you demand a 50-50 egalitarian distribution of that crushing pressure, forcing the delicate stained glass to hold up the stone roof, the entire structure mathematically collapses.
The vulnerable members of the family, women and children, are crushed under the weight of an unforgiving external reality they were never biologically or structurally designed to bear alone.
And Riker is so committed to this structural analysis that he actually extrapolates this into the realm of astrophysics and thermodynamics.
Oh, right, the emotional black hole.
He coins this term, which is central to his thesis. It is a dark but mathematically consistent extension of his argument against the egalitarian model.
Explain the physics of it.
Well, in astrophysics, a black hole is a region of space-time where gravity is so overwhelmingly dense that nothing, not even light, can escape its pull. Riker says that female-coded happiness, when it is entirely untethered from the grounding rod of objective reality and inappropriately elevated to be the supreme guiding metric of a family success, acts precisely like a black hole.
Because it is a bottomless void. By definition, a void cannot be filled.
Exactly. Riker argues that you can pour all of your finite resources into it. You can pour in your money, your physical labor, your time, your dignity, and endless rational compromises.
And the void will consume absolutely everything without ever, for a single moment, reaching a state of thermodynamic equilibrium.
It will always demand more, because happiness is a fleeting state, not a structural foundation.
Therefore, Structuring your life, your marriage, or your society around keeping a chaotic, fluctuating force perpetually happy is a structural guarantee of total exhaustion, resource depletion, and ultimate collapse.
It's mathematically doomed.
Now, I want to bridge this structural theory to something very practical that is absolutely ubiquitous in our culture, and Riker attacks it head on. The media portrayal of fathers.
Ah, yes, the sitcom dad.
Think about almost every sitcom, commercial, or movie from the 1990s onward. You almost always have the exact same dynamic. The bumbling, idiot, overgrown man-child father who is constantly making messes, forgetting anniversaries, and bungling basic tasks.
Paired with the hyper-competent, eye-rolling, long-suffering wife who has to manage him like he is a giant toddler.
Exactly. Now, if the 50-50 model physically fails, and if the strong male pillar is structurally necessary to keep the roof from caving in, why is our cultural media so aggressively, relentlessly pushing this specific idea that male leadership is inherently dangerous, incompetent, or laughable?
Riker views this very seriously. He does not see the idiot dad sitcom trope as harmless comedy or lazy writing.
He views it as a psychological operation.
A deliberate, highly calculated societal demoralization campaign. The specific goal of this media bombardment is to make men voluntarily abandon what the philosopher Thomas Aquinas called synderesis.
Synderesis. Let's unpack that because it's a crucial concept here.
In Thomistic philosophy, synderesis is the innate natural capacity of the human mind to intuitively apprehend the basic principles of morality and objective reason.
So for a man, it is the deep-seated biological and spiritual instinct to impose order on chaos, to protect, to establish boundaries, and to lead. It is his internal compass pointing toward objective truth.
Exactly. Riker argues that the modern media relentlessly broadcasts the capitulation to female chaos as the highest moral good.
They want to systematically gaslight men.
Yes, into believing that their logical nature, their protective instinct, their inherent desire to establish rigid, unyielding boundaries is somehow a toxic bug in the system, rather than the foundational feature of civilization itself.
The psychological operation is simple but devastating. If you can shame a man out of his synderesis, if you can make him embarrassed to act like a patriarch,
you castrate his authority and dismantle the family's defense system without ever having to fire a single physical shot.
But the truly terrifying part of Riker's book is his assertion that while the media uses psychological warfare, the system absolutely does fire shots.
Oh, heavily.
Or at least it uses the explicit threat of state violence to back up this cultural demoralization. Because this demoralization isn't just happening on television. According to the book, it is physically enforced at the barrel of a gun by the state.
And this realization pivots the book from cultural critique to deep institutional history.
This is where Riker's analysis becomes highly legally and historically focused.
He starts by establishing a baseline, contrasting the ancient Roman legal concept of patria potestas with the modern administrative welfare state.
Patria potestas, translated literally as the power of the father.
Yes. In ancient Rome, which built one of the most enduring empires in human history, this was the absolute, unshakable legal foundation of the father's authority over his household.
It essentially meant that the patriarch was the supreme legal entity within his family.
It gave him the legal grammar, backed by the state, to say no to chaos, to enforce order, and to manage the resources of his family as he saw fit.
Riker argues that this absolute legally recognized authority was not an exercise in tyranny, but a structural necessity to create a stable, multi-generational civilization. The Roman state deeply respected the sovereign, impenetrable boundary of the patriarchal family.
But today, Riker argues, the state has completely and violently usurped that role. It has breached the walls of the cathedral.
He zeroes in on two very specific legal mechanisms that destroyed the modern family: the advent of unilateral no-fault divorce and the bureaucratic nightmare of Title 4D of the Social Security Act.
Let's start with no-fault divorce, because Riker calls it an explicitly unconscionable contract.
Riker views the modern family court system not as an arbiter of justice or fairness, but as a predatory administrative cartel. Let's look at the mechanics of no-fault divorce.
Historically, marriage was an ironclad contract.
Right. It could only be legally broken if one party committed a serious, objective, provable fault: adultery, severe physical abuse, total abandonment.
No-fault divorce, which swept through the West in the late 20th century, changed the legal paradigm entirely.
It allowed the marriage contract to be dissolved unilaterally by one party for absolutely any subjective reason whatsoever, including mere emotional dissatisfaction, or falling out of love.
Right. And to put that in perspective, think about literally any other contract in the Western legal system.
Let's use a business example.
Perfect. Imagine you have a business partner. You both invest your life savings into a company. Then, on a random Tuesday, your partner decides they feel emotionally unfulfilled.
Under the logic of no-fault divorce, they could unilaterally dissolve the partnership against your will.
Legally seize 50% or more of the business assets you built.
Take primary control of the company's intellectual property, which in this analogy is the children.
And then have a judge legally compel you to fund their future lifestyle from your future earnings, under the explicit threat of you being thrown in a literal cage if you fail to pay.
No rational, sane human being would ever sign a business contract with those terms.
Riker argues that is precisely what modern marriage has become for men. It is an unconscionable contract, heavily subsidized by state violence.
And the bureaucratic engine that powers this extraction, according to Riker, is Title 4D of the Social Security Act.
This is where we have to explain the actual mechanics of the bureaucracy, because it is staggering when you understand how it works.
It really is. Title 4D essentially creates a massive, perverse financial incentive structure for state governments.
It provides federal matching funds to states based heavily on their child support collection metrics.
So for every dollar a state's family court system extracts in child support, the federal government rewards that state with funding that bolsters the state's budget, pays the salaries of court officials, and expands the administrative bureaucracy.
Which means, from a purely economic standpoint, the state family court system operates exactly like a corporation.
And what is the raw material that this corporation needs to generate revenue?
Broken families, divorced men paying maximum child support.
Riker views this as the literal commodification of children. The state is financially incentivized to tear the patriarchal family apart, remove the father, and assign him maximum child support, because a fractured family generates massive administrative revenue.
Whereas an intact, happy family generates $0 for the state bureaucracy.
It is an extraction machine.
But Riker doesn't just blame bureaucratic greed. He traces the deliberate ideological origins of this destruction back to the Frankfurt School.
Yeah, and he cites a very specific text, right?
A 1932 book called Towards Soviet America by William Z. Foster, who is the chairman of the Communist Party USA.
This blew my mind. Most people think of Marxism purely in economic terms, the workers seizing the means of production.
But Foster realized that economic Marxism was fundamentally failing to take root in America.
Right, the American working class wasn't revolting because they had upward mobility, they had the church, and most importantly, they had strong, nuclear patriarchal families.
Precisely. Foster and the thinkers of the Frankfurt School recognized that a strong autonomous family unit, led by a patriarch who provides for and protects his own, is the ultimate impenetrable defense against state collectivism.
A self-sufficient family does not rely on the state, therefore the state cannot subjugate it.
So according to Riker's analysis, the cultural Marxists consciously shifted their battlefield. They realized they couldn't win on economics, so they attacked the culture.
They aim to completely unmake the family by systematically severing the bond between the father and the home and infiltrating and feminizing Christian institutions.
So, in this historical framing, Riker views modern feminism completely differently than the mainstream narrative.
We are told feminism is about strong, independent women who don't need a man, who are forging their own path in the corporate world.
Riker scoffs at this. He explicitly labels modern feminism as state-mediated parasitism.
State-mediated parasitism. That is a devastating, highly controversial critique.
He argues that feminism merely transferred female dependency from the individual husband to the leviathan of the state.
Feminism screams for absolute autonomy and liberation from traditional gender roles, while simultaneously demanding that the government act as a surrogate husband.
Providing for them via massive wealth redistribution, subsidized childcare, affirmative action, and crippling alimony payments extracted by force from the men they divorced.
The state replaces the husband as the provider, but without requiring any of the loyalty or cooperation that a husband would require.
And this structural reality leads to a staggering statistical dichotomy that Riker points out to highlight the absolute hypocrisy of the system.
He points out that society constantly demonizes men as the oppressors, the beneficiaries of a tyrannical patriarchy.
Yet the objective data shows that men make up roughly 85% of the unsheltered homeless population.
Men account for over 92% of all workplace fatalities.
Men are literally dying in the dirt, freezing on the streets, and falling off high-rise scaffolds to keep the physical infrastructure of civilization running.
while simultaneously being lectured by HR departments about their innate privilege. But this brings up a very tough question that I want to pose to his framework.
Let's hear it.
If the system is truly this rigged, and men are this disposable, how does Riker explain the overwhelming cultural dominance of movements like Believe All Women, or the corporate enforcement of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? Don't those movements prove that women and minorities are still fighting for basic equality against an entrenched male power structure?
Riker vehemently rejects that premise. He views Believe All Women and DEI not as progressive steps forward toward equality, but as terrifying, deliberate regressions to pre-Enlightenment, feudal doctrines of tyranny.
Let's break down Believe All Women first.
In a civilized Western society governed by the principles of logos, justice requires due process, empirical evidence, the right to confront your accuser, and the absolute presumption of innocence.
The burden of proof is on the accuser.
Believe All Women demands that society bypass empirical evidence entirely and assign absolute, unassailable truth value to a female subjective narrative simply because she is female.
It is an epistemological framework where objective reality is forcefully subordinated to female emotional subjectivity. It shifts the burden of proof entirely to the accused man, requiring him to prove a negative, which is logically impossible.
Exactly. It replaces the scales of justice with the whims of a mob, and then he applies a similar historical lens to DEI frameworks, comparing the logic behind DEI to the ancient tyrannical doctrine of the corruption of blood.
Oh, this is a fascinating historical connection. For those who don't know, the corruption of blood was a deeply medieval, feudal legal doctrine.
In feudal times, if a man committed treason against the king, the state didn't just execute the man.
The corruption of blood doctrine dictated that his children, his grandchildren, and all his descendants were also legally punished. Their land was seized, their titles were revoked, their very bloodline was considered tainted.
They carried the guilt of their ancestors' crimes forever.
It was so abhorrent that the framers of the U.S. Constitution explicitly, permanently forbade it in Article 3, Section 3. They knew it was the absolute hallmark of tyranny.
Right. And Riker argues that modern DEI frameworks, which actively penalize living, breathing individuals in the workplace or in university admissions, based solely on the perceived historical grievances of their ancestors or their immutable racial and sexual identity, are attempting to resurrect this banned feudal practice under the sanitized corporate label of equity.
DEI dictates that a young man today carries the ancestral guilt of the patriarchy, and therefore his competence must be punished, his promotions denied, to enforce ideological obedience.
It elevates identity over objective merit, which Riker argues is the death knell of a functional civilization.
Okay, we have mapped out the entire architecture of the trap. We've explored the etymological bait and switch, the psychological Trojan horse of therapy, the physical impossibility of the egalitarian model, and the lethal extractive cartel of the family court system and state-enforced ideology.
Riker has painted a meticulously documented picture of a system that is fundamentally, inescapably, mathematically rigged against the rational man.
So what the hell do we do? If a man wakes up, looks around, and realizes he is trapped in this matrix, what is the actionable path forward? How does he actually survive without going insane?
This brings us to the final prescriptive section of the book, the contentment standard and the sovereign sanctum.
Riker's solution is radical, but it is entirely logically consistent with the grim premise he has established.
He states bluntly that the rational man cannot vote his way out of this. He cannot reform these corrupt macro institutions.
The institutional rot is simply too deep, and the financial incentives to destroy men are too vast.
Instead, the man's absolute duty is to unilaterally withdraw his consent from the system and build what Riker calls parallel structures.
And that massive undertaking starts with reclaiming absolute, unyielding authority within his own mind and his own home.
He must permanently transition away from the biological trap of happiness and violently implement the contentment standard.
The contentment standard. This is where Riker provides a very rigid, objective blueprint. He replaces the shifting goalposts of emotion with 4 very specific objective metrics of success.
Yes. Order, loyalty, resource management, and peace.
Order, loyalty, resource management, and peace.
Riker dictates that a man must evaluate his success as a patriarch based solely on these objective realities and entirely divorce his self-worth from his wife's subjective emotional weather.
Let's look at the metrics. Is the home physically secure and orderly? Are the finances solvent? Are debts being paid? And are resources being managed efficiently for the future?
Is there strict fidelity and loyalty within the ranks of the family? And are the children being actively protected from the ideological chaos of the outside world?
If those four massive pillars are standing strong, the man is succeeding. Period.
But wait, let's play this out in reality. What if those four pillars are standing? He is providing everything, but his wife is visibly unhappy.
What if she is pacing around the house, pouting, complaining to her friends, or telling him she feels emotionally unfulfilled because he works too much?
According to Riker's framework, especially then, the man must hold the line. Riker insists that the man must completely, ruthlessly detach his assessment of his own value from her transient neurochemistry.
Her passing dissatisfaction, her manufactured grievances are entirely irrelevant to the objective structural reality of the fortress he has built.
He must refuse to negotiate with emotional terrorism. He must refuse to apologize for a void he did not create.
He simply nods, acknowledges her feeling without validating its premise, and goes back to managing the empire.
To maintain this kind of iron frame, to withstand the constant pressure of a culture and a spouse demanding you capitulate, requires incredible mental fortitude.
To achieve this, Riker introduces a concept that I found historically fascinating: the alchemy of masculine solitude.
He says that to survive the modern world, a man absolutely must establish what he calls a sovereign sanctum.
This is a critical architectural and psychological necessity in Riker's survival guide. He points to the historical precedent of the Victorian gentleman's locked study.
Historically, the patriarch possessed a physical space within the home that was utterly inviolable. Wives, children, servants, they did not enter unbidden.
He was a secular sanctuary of absolute, undisputed authority where the man could govern his affairs, read the classics, manage the estate's finances, and maintain his intellectual grip on objective reality without interference.
But today, look at the architecture of the modern suburban home. The modern man has been systematically evicted from his own domain.
He pays the 30-year mortgage, but he doesn't have a single square foot of sovereign space.
Yeah.
The wife gets the master bedroom decor, the kids get the playroom, and the man is relegated to a folding chair in the garage.
Or he is subjected to the gynocentric timetable where he can be interrupted, demanded upon, and handed a honey-do list at any given moment of the weekend.
And that constant, relentless interruption, Riker argues, destroys a man's rational autonomy. It scatters his intellect.
Riker argues that a man must reclaim a locked room, whether it's a study, a workshop, a shed in the backyard, and draw a hard physical boundary that he absolutely refuses to negotiate.
This space serves as a daily ideological detoxification chamber.
When a man is bombarded for 8 hours a day by corporate HR telling him he is toxic, by the media telling him he is an idiot, and by domestic demands telling him his only purpose is to serve and appease, he desperately needs isolation.
To scrub away those lies and realign his mind with the eternal truths of the Western canon.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here, using Riker's own anticipation of his critics in the text. He knows exactly how this sounds to modern ears.
He knows that Marxist and feminist critics, and frankly most modern couples therapists, will look at this demand for a locked, sovereign male space where he ignores his wife's emotional demands, and they will howl that it is selfish toxicity.
They will call it patriarchal abuse, emotional neglect, and toxic isolationism. How does he justify this philosophically? Because on the surface, it sounds like he is just telling men to abandon their families emotionally.
He counters that accusation brilliantly by returning to Thomistic philosophy, the rigorous theology and philosophy of Thomas Aquinas.
Riker argues that modern society has a perverted view of charity and love. True charity, true love, inherently requires the perfection of one's own soul as a strict prerequisite.
To use a modern cliche, you cannot pour from an empty cup. If a man allows his intellect to be constantly scattered, his boundaries repeatedly breached, and his vital energy drained by endless emotional demands and trivial interruptions, he becomes a hollow shell.
He becomes a reactionary, exhausted husk. And a hollow shell is completely incapable of fulfilling his primary biological and spiritual telos, which is to be the unshakable pillar that protects and provides for his family.
So by protecting his own mind, he is actually protecting them.
Exactly. Setting an immovable boundary around his contemplative time, enforcing his sovereign sanctum, is not an act of selfishness. It is the highest act of justice toward his own soul.
And ultimately, it is the only viable way he can maintain the structural stability and emotional regulation that his family desperately requires to survive the chaos of the world.
You simply cannot give peace to your household if you do not fiercely possess it within yourself.
So establishing this sanctum allows a man to firmly anchor himself back in logos. It allows him to set an immovable boundary of rational control. And that brings us to the profound and honestly quite brutal final takeaway of this book. We're moving into the epilogue now, where Riker reflects on his entire journey.
Riker leaves his readers with a philosophical framing that completely, utterly flips the narrative of male victimhood.
After spending hundreds of pages detailing how rigged, extractive, and mathematically unjust the system is, he insists that the brutal initiation of the family court meat grinder, the loss of the house, the humiliation, the financial ruin, the alienation,
Is actually, paradoxically, a profound gift.
a gift. I mean, that is a jagged, incredibly hard pill to swallow for someone listening to this who has just lost half their pension, had their reputation destroyed, and lost daily access to their own kids. How on earth does he rationalize that kind of destruction as a gift?
Because, Riker argues, it is the only force violent enough to strip away the false ego.
Most modern men spend their entire lives building an identity based on appeasement, on desperately seeking female approval, on conforming to the lies of a corporate and social system that secretly despises them.
They build their house on sand.
When the system turns its eye of Sauron on them and destroys that life, that false appeasing self is annihilated.
And while the descent into that chaos is agonizing and terrifying, Riker says that what eventually emerges on the other side of that fire is a man who is incredibly dangerous, completely ordered, and truly free.
He is dangerous to this system because he can no longer be controlled by the threat of female disapproval or societal shaming.
The absolute worst thing they could threaten him with has already happened to him, and he realized he didn't die, he survived.
Precisely. He realizes that the prize of happiness he was endlessly exhausting himself chasing was a phantom all along. It was a control mechanism.
And having lost the illusion, he reclaims his true foundational masculine nature.
I want to leave you, the listener, with this final, incredibly challenging thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Riker challenges men to stop looking up at the sky, to stop praying to the universe for fairness.
Fairness is a concept invented for children on a playground.
The system is not fair. It is mathematically designed to extract from you. The challenge, the ultimate test of your masculine agency, is to stop whining about the injustice of it all, and instead embrace the heavy, glorious burden of your own agency.
Think about what it actually means to impose your will upon the chaos of reality.
To stop being a passive sponge, absorbing everyone else's emotional demands, and to start being the uncompromising architect of your own unshakable contentment.
What does it mean to look at the absolute wreckage of your former life, pick up the very dirt that the system tried to bury you in, and use it to build a new, impenetrable empire?
It means fundamentally understanding that true, lasting peace is not the absence of struggle or the absence of conflict.
It is the peace of a fortress whose stone walls are utterly secure and whose garrison is highly disciplined.
It is the deep, bedrock certainty of a man who has finally aligned his life entirely with objective truth. And as we close out this incredibly heavy, intense, and deeply philosophical deep dive, I want to reiterate one final time. The views we explored today from Conrad Riker are intensely provocative, they are uncompromising, and they are highly aggressively critical of the bedrock of modern Western society.
Our goal today was not to tell you what you should believe or to endorse this worldview as the absolute truth.
Our mission was to thoroughly, impartially unpack the perspective offered in The Folly of Happiness. We wanted to show you the blueprints of his argument, to expose the architecture of his thought process so that you can weigh it against the reality of your own life.
We have acted as the cartographers drawing the map. It is entirely up to you, the listener, to navigate the terrain and decide what is true.
Exactly. Now, before you go, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the show so we can keep bringing you these massive, unapologetic deep dives.
If this conversation resonated with your own experiences, or even if it just made you incredibly angry and you want to challenge the text for yourself to see where his logic holds up,
Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy The Folly of Happiness. Why Rational Men Choose Growing Up and Waking Up. Read it. Digest it.
and be absolutely sure to follow Conrad Riker on Substack at the handle @ConradRiker for more his ongoing unfiltered insights into the culture.
We will be back very soon with another extensive breakdown. Until then, stay curious, guard your sanctum, and keep diving deep.